Hi, everybody. I know it's not Monday, it's not Friday, it's Tuesday, but every so often I get an opportunity to talk to somebody I respect and somebody who will have something unique to add to the program instead of my not so mellifluous drone. Joining me today is Bill Livingston, the veteran journalist from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, amongst other cities. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing fine, Mark.
Good. And, we got some things that we want to talk about. And really, it's going to be Bill who guides a lot of this conversation. I was just talking to him before the show started up here. And, the historical perspective of sports is always interesting to me. I wax on about the way things used to be. One of my great pet peeves, Bill, is the day that the Olympics became a professional competition instead of an amateur competition. I feel like I lost part of my essence. Been a huge change in professional sports. And I wanted to start off the program with a simple question to you. This will be the kind of journalistic piece that I know. This is the kind of scoop that you lived for. During a televised interview, Johnny Manziel has told the world that he is now John Manziel, and that he's bipolar. I wanted to ask you which one of him will get back into the NFL first.
None. I don't think he can control his demons. I thought when he was drafted out of Texas A&M, that he loved the game enough to treat it with respect. I really did. I thought he would, all my people that I knew and respected in Texas, writers, and I didn't know any scouts down there anymore, but writers that had covered A&M or that covered the Big 12, and now the SEC when he was there, thought that he, processed information quickly, was great at reading defenses, was a tremendous improviser. I thought he could play, and I was all for it. I thought the franchise had been moribund for so long that they needed an exciting player, a Heisman winner, and he'd rather party than pay attention to what he had to do. His performance against Cincinnati in his first start was one of the most abysmal things I've ever seen. He clearly didn't know the playbook. I was very disappointed, and I was one of my biggest. If you're a columnist and you actually have an opinion and you don't just try to capture the moment, which is what a lot of people who can really write do, you're going to have some swings and misses. And boy, that was a big one by me. One of my biggest.
Well, I mean, really, if you're going to have an opinion, the thing is, you put yourself on the line. And there are people who will remind me, like, I was not in favor of Baker Mayfield. All right? I'm not saying that I wouldn't have taken him. I had doubts,
but I was afraid he'd be another Manziel because I saw him plant the flag in the Block O, and okay, I had no dog in the fight. Although I was the Ohio State columnist since 1984, pretty much at the Plain Dealer until I retired. But I just thought, why are you doing this with your reputation? It's just going to throw gas on the fire. But he was everything I had hoped Manziel would be. I mean, I think everyone's very, very pleased with Baker Mayfield. I thought he should have been Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it was a big swing and miss for me because I was saying, it's not that I wouldn't take him, but I wouldn't have taken him first and foremost. I would, and I was more Rosen, and boy, people would have slapped me around for the next decade of my life had that actually happened. But
some guys start kind of slow too. You don't know until like 2 or 3 years, really, but. Mayfield surprised me, and from the very start, from when he came in and because of the injury and to the starter and took over, it was just a different feel. I mean, he was in charge of the offense. He had, he ran the huddle. They got out of the huddle into plays, and it just seemed like he had the command of he commanded respect from his teammates, and that's what you get by really not publicizing yourself until you have something that you've shown you can do. And, Johnny never did really anything here.
Yeah. Now, of all the things, and I know you've written, goodness knows how many stories you've written. What is the one that you took the most backlash from?
Well, the all right, it wasn't here. Okay, it was in Philadelphia. I was a high school reporter in Dallas, and I had the Grantland Rice Scholarship to Vanderbilt, which is it's a national sports writing scholarship named for Grantland Rice, who was a Vanderbilt alumnus. And one of the I had worked for the school paper, and I was covering high schools in Dallas, and one of the Grantland Rice winners who had followed me. Do you know who Joe Bob Briggs is? He's a slasher movie reviewer. And,
yes.
Yeah. Kung Fu and all this stuff, and very funny and outrageous reviews of B movies and stuff. Well, his real name's John Bloom, and he had the scholarship. So they needed desperately. They had a guy who was leaving the staff. He was Chip Babcock, who later became. He was going to law school. He was Charles Babcock, who represented Oprah in the suit against Texas cattlemen. So he did rather well outside the newspaper business. But they wanted somebody who could come in and cover high schools for 1 year, and then they wanted to move me. I got the job. They wanted to move onto a better beat, and I was going to get the 76ers beat. Well, while I was, first of all, you can't really do high schools that well if you're not from the area, because you don't know the rivals, you don't know the lore. But it was a playoff game in the Catholic League basketball, and Roman Catholic was the original first Catholic high school in the country. And it was located one block from the Inquirer building on Broad Street. And they had a game against, I don't remember the other school, but and their fans were, they had a great program. They played sort of like Virginia, suffocating defense. Anyway, their fans were abusive and wanted the other team's head on a platter, and wanted to win by 20 points every game. And there were a lot of obnoxious cheers going on from the Roman Catholic stands. And a kid was at the line for the other team shooting a free throw late in the game, and he was hit by a rock thrown from the stands. And it came from the Roman stands, and I wrote that it came from the Roman stands, and that the Roman Catholic stands, and that they had engendered this. They had created this atmosphere of emotional tension and degradation of the other team throughout the game. Well, it turned out that the student was not from Roman Catholic. He was from some other school, and I don't know whether he came with a Roman Catholic friend or just slipped into their stands. He did not attend Roman Catholic. So when my story came out, they bravely marched the block from Roman Catholic High School to the Inquirer, and they had about 200 kids gathered on the pavement 5 stories below the newsroom chanting, "We want Livingston."
Oh, my.
So I would say that was probably the biggest blowback I ever had. And they invited the editor invited the student body president up, and he quickly read my story. He didn't cover high schools. And it took the same argument I had, that they had created this climate in which it was just like a powder keg, and defended me to the hilt. But that's the only time I ever had a bunch of people praying for my head.
Well, and it wasn't that much of a leap of faith, because I think Romans were famous for stoning people.
Yeah, yeah, right. I got a lot of backlash. Well, certainly on Manziel, where I was just wrong. I treated Ernest Biner badly, and I treated Ernie Camacho badly. And Camacho, of course, is the only player who ever tried to attack me. Yeah, well, he was some dreadful ERA. It was in '87, the year after the Indians hit like 410 as a team, and we're in the pennant race. And he had a very dismal record in save percentage. And I got the bright idea that he's supposed to be a fireman, and that instead of using his name, instead of using fire in a column, I would use his last name. And so I had such lines as People from all over Northeast Ohio will come to the Indians game for the giant, spectacular 4th of July Camacho Works. You can always find a Dalmatian down at the Camacho house. Remember that great movie, Chariots of Camacho? And it said, like, his uniform should say close cover before striking. So I had been told and you write something like that, you got to show up, and they get their innings to try to answer you. And I had been told by one of the PR guys that he is really out for you. And I said, well, I can't leave. So I sauntered over to Joe Carter, who liked me, and so did Andre Thornton, who are fairly close to each other, and started just kind of aimlessly chatting with them. And Camacho came out of the pitchers and catchers meeting and broke into like a full body twitch and was just glaring at me. And I saw him and I said, prove me wrong on the field. I'll take it all back. And here he came in just a bull rush.
Oh.
And I did have a strategy. It was to dive at his legs and hope to take him down and that someone would separate us before he pummeled me. But he never got there because Carter, Thornton, some other player who I don't remember, and clubhouse man Cy Bynick, who was about 5 feet tall and almost as round, all managed to subdue Ernie. And the Plain Dealers baseball writer, Paul Hoynes, took me by the, he said, let's get out of here. And Ernie was spread eagle on the floor with a guy on each limb, an arm, a leg, another arm, the other leg. And I'm stepping past him, and he's cussing me in Spanish. And as we walked out, I said, man, it took 4 guys to hold him down. And Paul said, thinking of Bynick, he said, 3.5. That was probably the player who was most upset with me. George McGinnis screamed at me once in Philadelphia, too.
I mean,
I had said he should be benched because he and Dr. J were same type of players, and Dr. J was just better.
Oh.
And they should use the defensive player and rebounder as a better complement. And George went for 44 that night and then told me what he thought of me. And every time I read that crap you write, I just consider the effing source. He said, jabbing me in the chest with a finger on just about every word.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you can't hide from words. I mean, it is funny because Ernie Camacho turned out to be bipolar, and that was the Hector Camacho. So he went back and forth between being Ernie and Hector. Looking at it from a different perspective, we'll stay with the Cleveland Indians. You were around the Indians, obviously. I hadn't thought of Ernie Camacho, thank goodness, for decades. What stories or people from a positive perspective, I'm not a kiss and tell guy about who the oddballs were, unless you're comfortable talking about it.
Will Bell was certainly the worst to deal with. But,
yeah, Albert was, I have my favorite Albert Bell story, and it wasn't even when Albert Bell was playing, and it wasn't even while I was in Ohio.
Okay.
He was the gift that kept on giving.
Yes.
And after he left Cleveland, went to Baltimore, and then, of course, his hip kind of caved in and just eroded. He was done with baseball and living in Baltimore. One of the owners of the Baltimore Oriole franchise had a daughter, and Albert had his eyes set on her. And the two of them had a relationship. And I was, by fluke, fortunate enough to run into this person here in Florida a number of years ago. And she wanted to come on the program to talk about Albert. And I said, we're not really a kiss and tell kind of show. I said, but what is it that's got you so upset? They had to have a restraining order against him because he was following her all over, and he was like a stalker and stalking her. And she literally went to Florida and took on the life of a physical trainer and instructor just to get away from this guy. I mean, he was a grade A Fruit Loop.
Oh yeah. He confided to me about his 12-step program when he went to get off the booze, and I said, well, what did you drink? And he drank it's called a gorilla fart. It's a drink that's 101 proof wild turkey bourbon, and 151 proof rum. Apparently, it will get you where you want to go really quickly with that kind of alcohol content. And he was, very forthcoming and polite in the interview and all of that. And I did a positive story on him, and the next day it was like he'd never seen me, never spoken to me before or anything. He was just one strange dude.
Yeah, but boy, could he hit a baseball.
Well, I would say in 1995, he definitely should have been there. There was a lame case made for Mo Vaughn that he had these big hits for the Red Sox, and Bell didn't have any important hits like that because the Indians won their division by 30 games. But he had far superior numbers, and he would have been the MVP for certain, except that he was just such a jerk that writers voted against him on personality.
Now, back in '95, I was in Flint, Michigan, owned a radio station there, and that was the only game I ever saw in what is now Progressive Field, but that was the Jake, and I witnessed Bell's 50th home run, and the place was rocking. I mean, it was
a perfect storm. This is not really a very good baseball town, I don't think. But the Browns were leaving, and then they were gone for 3 years, and had a beautiful new ballpark after the old crumbling one. And you had a young, exciting team that scored a lot of runs and played, bang the ball off the wall baseball. I never saw anyone, and I didn't, see Ted Williams, but except on TV when I was a kid. But I never saw anyone who was deadlier on a mistake pitch than Albert. It's like he almost never missed a mistake pitch. And pitchers are human and do make mistakes. And you see guys. Joe Carter fouled one straight back before he hit the home run that won the World Series off of Mitch Williams. Albert would hit the first one, out of the Sky Dome if it were possible. He just did not miss mistake pitches that year. And in 144 games, he had 50 homers and 50 doubles. And I think he had there were 18 more games. He had some shot at 60. And I don't believe he was on steroids. That's one thing I don't think he did.
Just cork every now and then.
Cheater. He had cork bats. He honored the game
that way. I'll tell you, I always thought that his OCD condition aided him and killed him. I think that his stretching regimen, which was monumental, okay, to say the least, his game prep was insane, and I think that led to the necrosis in his hip that shortened his career.
Maybe. He also kept, this was before computers. He kept note cards, but he'd go, after each at bat, he'd go back and what got him out, the sequence of pitches. He was a very studious guy, and all the stories were true. He was a good student at LSU. He had in accounting, I think it was. He had you can have your grades released if you want to, and we had people that wrote stories about it. It was legit. He was a good student. He was a bright guy. He just had, boy, did he have behavioral problems. Now, he was a perfectionist. He could not, the best hitter in the world. Nobody's ever going to hit 400 again with the shifts and the analytics and all of that. And every reliever that comes in throws 95, and you don't get a third or fourth time with a starting pitcher, hardly ever. It's just not going to happen again. But even then, the best hitter in the world fails 6 out of 10 times. It's a sport of failure and dealing with it and compensating for it and learning from it. And Albert couldn't handle it.
Who are the guys that you remember on the Indians through all the years and the decades?
Oh, well, Omar was my favorite player by far. He was the defensive star at the most important position other than catcher. And he just had a radiant personality and a flashy player, and was, I think he's the best shortstop I ever saw. And I didn't see Ozzie Smith that much. He won double-digit Gold Gloves, came within hailing distance of 3,000 hits, and I can't believe there's controversy and people think he's not going to worthy of the Hall of Fame. I thought he was terrific, and he was, you would go to watch infield practice, which no one ever does. People watch batting practice because Omar would do that ball transfer that was just like it would touch his glove, and all of a sudden it was in his throwing hand. He would bat it to it because He had a glove that was almost as hard as a skillet. I don't know how he played with it. The leather was so stiff. And sometimes, just for amusement, he was a soccer player too in Venezuela. He'd flip a ball up with a grounder up with his foot and catch it and throw it. It was just it was like a magic act. The guy, he was chosen to speak at the gathering downtown after the '95 World Series. Even though they didn't win it, he was the guy that spoke to the crowd. I mean, I loved him as a player, and he was a nice fellow too. You didn't mess with him though. I remember once. '98 maybe, taking the subway out to Yankee Stadium in the ALCS, and Omar turns out to have been in the same subway car. It was me and Hoynes and Bud Shaw walking in, and some fans started yelling, "Hey, look, it's effing Omar. If I'd known it was Omar, I'd have broken his arm." And Omar turned and said, "Oh yeah? Why don't you come and try it? I'll break your arm, you effing, you know."
Yeah.
And I mean, his chest swelled up. He wasn't going to take any crap from anybody. And that was a different side of Omar from the smiling guy that you usually saw. But I loved him as a player. Just loved him.
You know, it's funny what you said about the infield practice. I'm a boxing historian, and very few people really watched fighters work out. Okay. Roberto Duran, people would come to see him skip rope. If you've never seen Roberto Duran skip rope, it was the craziest, wildest, most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life. I mean, and it was like a tourist attraction. The mundane workout, but he would finish with the jump rope thing, and people would crowd around. Omar, what I tell you, I did see Ozzie Smith play. Ozzie Smith was extremely acrobatic and flashy. The thing with Omar could damn well be flashy, but he was so fundamentally sound. You know, to me, it was like
he didn't do backflips, right?
Right. You know,
Ozzie played on turf, which evens out the bounces, but the ball gets to you faster.
Right.
Most of the baseball writers who were around in that era think Ozzie was the best. But I would certainly, I would think they would think, another thing is that you started having the slugging shortstops like A-Rod and, Garcia Parra for a while. And Omar was never that guy. He was more the traditional type of hitter as a shortstop. But I thought one of the things he did on pop flies, he would turn his back to the infield on a high sun day without clouds and field the ball almost like Willie Mays on the catch with his back to the plate, because then the bill of his cap helped shield the sun. He had sunglasses on anyway, but I thought that was just pure genius. He was a fascinating guy. I remember at the '95 World Series party, only Omar could do this and get away with it. My wife and I went to it, and Omar had a canary yellow suit on, and it worked.
I'm talking to somebody who's from my generation. You talk about who are the best dancers, and Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, okay? You're going to fall on one side of the camp or the other. Gene Kelly was very athletic, and he was very masculine and very almost gymnastical.
Fred Astaire was sophisticated, and graceful,
Right.
Yeah.
Omar Vizquel was Fred Astaire. His feet.
Yeah.
I mean, he made things that looked impossible. He made them look easy because he got in front of the ball. He moved in a way that, and he could make the sensational one-hand grab and throw in one motion kind of thing. But the balls, you never really got a sense of Omar's range, because at the crack of the bat, his feet moved. And it was like watching Fred Astaire doing things that were like, wow, that's supposed to be hard. But, man, he was never out of control. And
well, that's one of the things. The analytics boys claim that his range wasn't all that we thought it was, and they say the same thing about Jeter. All I know is that I thought he had great range, and Derek Jeter's the reason the Yankees. He was one of the most important players in the Yankees dynasty in the late '90s, and made when he was out of the lineup, they didn't do that well. But you were talking about boxing. I've never gotten into the MMA stuff at all.
No.
But I liked boxing, and it's unfortunate that well, it's clearly a football creates brain damage. Think about boxing.
Yes.
But I covered a lot of big fights, and back before it became marginalized, I covered Hagler Leonard, and I covered Hagler Hearns and some Foreman. I never covered Ali, but I did meet him. I was in his house once. But oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name. Aaron Pryor, I covered his fight, some of his fights. It was just a Spinks. It was just an elemental thing, and Hagler Hearns was one of the great things ever. It was just eight minutes of throwing bombs, because it doesn't take those guys as long to warm up as it does the heavyweights. I
saw that fight in the Palace Theater in downtown Canton, Ohio. It was the closed circuit showing of that fight.
Right.
And so help me God, when they came out of their corners and bombs away, I mean, everybody stood. Nobody.
Oh, it was just incredible. I was at Caesar's Palace that night, and writing about it. It was. I remember it was just the most breathtaking. It was 2 full rounds and 2 minutes of the third, and that was it. And it was spectacular and brutal, and everything that boxing fans, courageous, everything that. I don't want to say ennobles a sport like that, because there's so many bad parts of it. But I was offered the boxing beat when we started having kids. I didn't want to travel that much anymore and be gone all the time with the 76ers. And Atlantic City was just opening up, and that boxing was going to be a big deal there. And it was for about 10 or 15 years. And they wanted me to do boxing. And instead, I went back and did Penn State football, which I'd done for 1 year in the 70s. I did it for 2 more years, and then did some more basketball, not as a beat man, though. But the reason I couldn't do it, they said, well, do you have a moral objection to it? And I said, no, I know people can get killed in the ring, and they're aware of that. That's what they sign on to risk. I said, I cannot deal with people like Bob Arum and Don King. I just cannot get down into that trough with those guys. And that's why I never became the boxing writer there.
Well, it was funny.
All boxers have great backstories, and there's strategy in boxing, unlike MMA. And if it hadn't been for the slime around the sport, I would have been happy to be the boxing writer.
Well, it's tough. When I was young and in Canton, I got to know a number of people in the game. Ronnie Harris, who was our Olympic hopeful from Canton in 1968 Mexico, right? Ronnie, nobody remembers Ronnie Harris. Ronnie Harris was a very good pro, and he was fighting at the time Marvin Hagler was fighting and wanted to fight with Hagler. The thing about Ronnie was that he was a left-hander, and he was about as exciting to watch as watching paint dry, because he was elusive. He didn't have a lot of power.
Steve Whitaker, sort of like that, a counter puncher.
Yeah, and you weren't going to get,
didn't initiate that much.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Not going to get a lot of action fights with the guy, but through him,
people don't want to fight lefties anyway, But I really, there was 2 things that I remember, well, 3 from my career. The biggest buzz in the air might have been a big heavyweight fight at Caesars, or it could have been the start of the 100 meters and men's 100 meters at the Olympics at track and field. And the third, a lot of people say this, I never really felt that way, but maybe just before they dropped the start flag in the Indy 500. But I think the other 2 were a heavyweight title fight and 100 meters. Because I like track and field too. The Olympics let me rediscover my love as a boy for track and field.
It's amazing. I got to know in Canton, Frankie Luca was the trainer and manager of Ernie Shavers. So I kind of got to know those guys. And Frankie was doing some televised fights from venues around Canton area that I was doing blow-by-blow commentary for him. Got to know a number of fighters. Got to know I warned you about this.
Well, it's your dog, yeah.
They're going to be so loud. They're going to get Archie going. Yeah. Getting to know the Rappaport brothers through Ronnie Harris, and getting to meet Jerry Cooney and that whole entourage of fighters and people. And there really is a side to the game that you just don't want to know, and it's a cruel sport. I had Ray Mancini on the program, and I frankly, and Ray is a lovely guy who will go down historically as the guy who killed Dooku Kim in the ring, right?
Right.
But he didn't kill Dooku Kim, and I told him that. The game killed Dooku Kim. He was a South Korean club fighter, and he had countless fights that were not recorded, and that damage preceded him into the ring. And it is the unfortunate reality of that sport. But when I
was in Philadelphia, at this club, there were these two bars and grills that were rivals that were just around the corner from each other. One was Doc Watson's Pub, and the other was Moriarty's. And if you know your Sherlock Holmes, that's fitting. And the bouncer, when he first came to Philadelphia, the bouncer at Doc Watson's Pub was Randall Tex Cobb.
Oh, my.
And I got to know him a little bit. Yeah. The guy that forced it. If he did nothing else, he made Howard Cosell give up.
That's right. that had to be when Howard went on strike. It was. Do you know how much it took to shut his mouth?
I know.
The last 3 rounds, he didn't commentate. It was just silence.
Oh, he was just appalled. I think it was 8,000 punches landed to like
10. I remember that like it was yesterday, and not even one right there. Howard, nothing from Howard, nothing, just silence.
Well, one thing about Howard, I have two stories.
No, tell him.
One was when I was in Dallas at the Morning News. He was giving a speech at the community college downtown, and there were like 75 people there. He was crushed. He said, "Was it publicized?" And I said, "Well, yeah, there were ads and stuff." And he said, "Who are you from? Where are you with, young man?" And I said, "I'm with the Morning News." And Blackie Sherrod was the great Texas columnist, and he was at the Times Herald, the rival paper. And he said, "Oh, Blackie's paper," and I just nodded. I just smiled, And at the end, he said, "Say hello to Blackie." Blackie probably didn't want to say hello to you either, Howard. But the other one was at the Olympics. Holyfield, it was 84. It was my first Olympics. Holyfield knocked some guy out and then was disqualified. They said he punched when the guy was after the bell or something like that.
Right.
And I was walking out with a friend of mine, and we had written someone else, some other bout, and he said, "What did Holyfield do?" And I said, "Oh, he knocked the guy out." And then we hear this explosion of boos, and the only person who had access to Holyfield was Cosell, because they had the TV rights, and he asked all the right questions. I will give him that. He was a journalist. He wasn't just one of these fanboys or talking pretty boy talk. He was certainly not a pretty boy, but he was not one of these talking heads airheads that didn't know anything. He asked all the questions we would have wanted asked, and I had to respect him for that. He was a newsman at heart.
Yeah, Cosell, it wasn't that he was just a bit full of himself, and interesting character. I wanted to ask you. You said you obviously had saw Olympic events. What events that you've seen, not just Olympic events but sporting events, affected you emotionally in a way that kind of left a lump in your throat?
Well, the only one I can say did that. I was when the Indians won the '95 pennant. They won it in Seattle, so there weren't a whole lot of fans around, and Indians fans around. And I'd been here. I came here in '84, and I remember when there were friends and relatives at the games at the old stadium, and you could hear you could hear the chatter in the dugouts on these cold, lonely nights. And I went down to the locker room and stepped inside, and they were squirting champagne at each other, and Dick Jacobs was in spring training, and I had to step back out into the corridor and take a deep breath and get control of myself, because I was starting to tear up and cry. And it's the only time in my life I felt that way at an event.
I mean, to me, athletics should be about, for the fans, not the participation in wacky things that we see now of fans running out on the field, but there should be a catharsis of sorts, that we invest some of our emotion, and not just in a
I'm sure it was that way when the Cavs finally won the Cleveland championship, but I think it was because of the tragedy that had happened down in Florida, and also while the Cavs were historically bad too, the Indians. There was no Cleveland sports. There were no Cleveland sports except the Indians for years and years and years. They've been around since 1901. And it was just I knew how much it meant, how the team had been such a laughing stock. It had been 41 years without the playoffs. And for them to be going to the World Series, it really kind of hit me. And I did not grow up here. I was not an Indians fan. I grew up as a Cardinals fan in Texas, which was the only you could get their games on KMOX. We didn't have teams back when I was a kid, but it really got to me. I realized how important it was to the people of Cleveland and to the franchise.
Yeah, the sports have changed, at least, and I know I've done this podcast now for what, 15 years, but I've been a sports fan since, I was a kid. The way we relate to sports, the way sports are publicized, as you grew in your career writing, and something like, we'll take the NFL as an example, and the growing awareness of CTE, which hurts me personally. It's very hard for me to talk about college football because it's become a massive business, and because it's a breeding ground seemingly for future health problems. When did you see the worm turn in college football specifically, where it went from a game to being a business?
Well, probably with the money that came in, and the Michigan had I can't remember his name, but they had an AD that was very far ahead of his time as far as promotions, and then they started, Ohio State started pricing games at variable pricing. You had to pay a lot more for the Michigan game than the less attractive games, and games started being late at night where it was difficult to make deadlines because all they wanted to do was have the TV promotions to be present on TV, and all the teams now. You knew Boise State because they were on ESPN. It's not like you have to be a Power 5. Look at UCF. But anyway, I think that was part of it, and I hate when Ohio State wears those crappy alternate uniforms for like the Michigan game. Are you kidding me? For the Michigan game? No, they didn't this year. That's one of the greatest rivalries in sports, not just in college football. Wear the scarlet and gray, or the home or away. Wear the whites if you're up at Ann Arbor. They wear a black uniform for Penn State because of the blackout. Well, I know the kids like it, and they really do. Recruits like it, and it sells more stuff. But I think it's really terrible. I want to see Ohio State and Michigan look like Ohio State and Michigan did when Bo and Woody were coaching. And also about colleges, Bob Ryan, the fine former columnist at the Boston Globe, had an autobiography out that I think he called the chapter on college sports "Smitten by a Woman of Low Repute," and that's pretty much the way I feel about it. I know that these kids are, they're not being openly paid anyway, there's some really nice rides that they have around a lot of campuses, but they're going to go pro. They're risking. It's a brutal sport. It's, as Bob Costa said, it's unacceptably brutal. I would not want my grandson to play it. But when you're watching a college game, there really are rivalries that make or break the season. Army, Navy, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma. Well, maybe not. That's too early in the season. Maybe Auburn, Alabama. And you're not just rooting for the laundry. You're rooting for your memories of college, for your teachers and your friends, and maybe for the drag or for the homecoming game. And there's a lot of sentimental emotion to college football. The traditions, the victory bell at Ohio State and Script, Ohio, and all the big drum at Purdue and at Texas. And you don't have that in the NFL. We always talk about the rivalry. Pittsburgh, what rivalry? Pittsburgh's ahead about 34-2 recently. It's like Michigan, Ohio State winning the two swings. It's not like there's a hatred for teams that embarrass you, but it's not like college football. All of those intangibles that I love in college football are not there in the NFL.
Well,
plus you had the whole thing with Trump and the kneeling, which those guys have a right to do that if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you honestly, what broke my heart more than anything, the whole idea, when I bring up CTE, young fans say, well, the players know what they're getting into.
Oh, and the league covered it up, and they harassed and tried to, run out of business the doctor in Pittsburgh who found it. They hounded these people. They were the worst people. They were a bunch of Lance Armstrongs who threatened to sue people who told the truth. The league has blood on its hands in that thing. It's disgraceful.
And what hurts is every so often a famous name from the past will announce that they are suffering from what appears.
Tommy Nobis.
Right.
I was a big Texas fan as a kid.
That's right.
He had it badly. Yeah.
So, but the story about Leroy Horde killed me because it's the guys that you remember watching, but they weren't star players. They were guys who passed through the radar of your team. And maybe only if you were a Michigan fan or if you were a Browns fan would you really remember Leroy Horde. And the fact
he had that one big year with a lot of touchdowns. I remember that.
Yes. And
he was a very funny guy.
Yep.
He, the Browns had some Ohio State players and I think Elliott was probably on the team, the center. He was a Michigan guy. And I did the old talk to the alums the week of the Ohio State game and, have them trash talk. And Leroy Horde was very funny. He said, the killer nuts of Ohio State. Oh, no, he said, yeah, you're going to ask me about the fighting nuts of Ohio State. And I started laughing. He said, worst nickname since the Killer Ducks of Oregon.
and to find out that he was suffering this way. And you know what the problem is? The problem is that it's almost like the gravity of a Leroy Horde with CTE is somehow lesser than the gravity of a bigger name player with it. And you start asking yourself the question, how many other guys like Leroy Horde are suffering in absolute obscurity, and that the numbers are far greater than what are being publicized because nobody's writing stories about the guys who weren't the big names in the game. And when PBS had the thing League of Denial, I know Doug Deacon didn't even want to watch it because he said, I don't want to know. He said sometimes I, have little forgetful things, and like everybody does have, like where did I put my keys, or just blank on the name of a player or something. And he didn't, he said, I don't, I have this secret fear that maybe this is the start of something else. And I talked to him and to Jerry Shirk, who was probably the Browns' best defensive lineman, maybe ever.
And Shirk watched it. He's a very intelligent guy, and he's worried. He was worried about it all the time. He said, "Yeah, he said I crashed helmets against Mike Webster, and he was like, victim one of CTE. He was the first guy they found it in. Said I worry about it a lot."
Yeah, it's hard for me sometimes to separate the fan, in me from the human in me, and sometimes, and
I don't know how tackle football can really be made safe because it's so split second. And Tressel said once, and now this was before the spread offense. I don't think any defensive coordinator or defensive-minded coach would agree with him now, but he said maybe we need to make the field bigger, like in Canada or something, because he said, look at how much bigger and faster people are when playing on the same field as when Teddy Roosevelt was frowning at football. So, yeah, I personally, I don't think we'll ever get rid of football in this country. It's too big a sport, but it's just going to be a gladiator sport, really. I mean, I can see numbers dwindling at all the feeder levels.
Yeah, let me ask you a question, and I know that this is probably the most sensitive thing as far as my podcast is concerned, and that is the role that politics plays in sports, which has suddenly kind of risen as opposed to the days where the national anthem was something that was played before a football game and everyone stood and rose and
well, it went away for a long time. You had in the 70s, and you had Ali, and you had the glove fist protest, Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the Olympics in '68. And you had, Kareem not playing in the Olympic basketball tournament. But then, they became mercenaries. And Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy my shoes too. But that's changed now. And I think it's because of who's president and the divisive policies he puts in place and the way he scapegoats people. But, that was one of the reasons I was very hard on LeBron when he left the first time, because I thought he had quit on the floor. And I think there are times when he's become disconnected from his teammates, and like when he just had such a defeatist posture after the horrible last seconds of the first game of the finals. You cannot have your leader slumping and not talking to anybody and putting a towel over his head before you go into overtime in the NBA Finals. And you could never say Michael Jordan didn't want to win every single game. That's why LeBron, in my mind, really won't ever be the number one best of player, although I think he has more attributes as a basketball player, really, than Jordan did. But the fact that he started speaking out, and I agree with him politically, but even if I didn't agree with him, they're citizens. They have a right to disagree with a bullying president.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about LeBron. My favorite LeBron story probably had little to do with LeBron. He was with the Miami Heat, and somebody snapped a shot. And I don't know if I can find this picture on the internet, but it was a picture that I saw, and it was when the Heat, in LeBron's last year with the Heat, that they lost to the Spurs in the playoffs, right, and were handled. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And it was the final huddle of a timeout that Spoelstra had called, and all of the guys are on the bench and they're circled around, and LeBron, his back is halfway turned and he's just gazing off into space.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that with Blatt and whom he outed on. I changed the last call. Even if he did it, he shouldn't have said it. And the worst I saw with that was when they were being eliminated in 2010 in Boston in the Game 6 after the dreadful Game 5, Labacle as it was called. Not by me, and I wish I'd thought of that. But Mike Brown popped off the bench, and they were down like 6 or so in the last, maybe it was 9 in the last minute, and he was yelling, "Foul him, foul him, foul him," and that's all you can do is to foul them, and they're not going to miss all their free throws, but you got to play it out, and once in a blue moon, it lets you back in the game, and LeBron just waved him back to the bench, like, go sit down and just let the clock run out, and that, they weren't going to win the game, but you just don't do that. You play the game out,
And
especially an elimination game.
As soon as I saw the picture, the first thing I did on my podcast is I started talking about how LeBron was coming back to Cleveland, and I got shouted off the planet. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, but the funny thing is with LeBron, he does wear so much of himself on his sleeve that, it's, and by the way,
and they don't wear helmets, and fans can sit close to them, and I'll tell you a good LeBron story. People don't, he actually said a few times that he cuts off his social media, which he does in the playoffs, and he doesn't read anything. Oh, bull whack. Come on, please. What I'm thinking about was, I think it was the year after they won it, they were playing Indiana, and they had been 25 points down at half. And they came roaring back it was game 3. They came roaring back in the second half. And actually, they succeeded to bully and went like 8 up with 3 or 4 minutes to go. And LeBron was having a very tough night at the foul line. And what they did was they started hack-a-shacking him and, hoping he would miss 1 of 2 and they could come down and take a 3. And they kind of got back to the edge of contention that way. So the next day at practice out at Hinkle Fieldhouse, where Hoosiers was filmed, after practice, LeBron's having his little media session, and I said, "What did you think about being hack-a-shacked?" And he looked up kind of angrily, and he said, "That wasn't any hack-a-shack. They were just trying to save the clock, conserve time." And I said, "They weren't fouling Korver, were they?" And he didn't like that at all. Kyle Korver's a 90% foul shooter. So the next game, not the next game. In the next series against Toronto, there was a game where he went 15 for 16 at the free throw line. And I'm telling you, Mark, this is absolutely God's own truth. I didn't make the press conference after the game because I was having computer problems and had to dictate the first several paragraphs of my story because it was coming in. It wasn't transmitting. I was having trouble with getting it connected. So then before succeeding game in Toronto, and they had a pregame press conference with each coach, and I'm walking back at I can't remember the name. It's not Rogers Center, I think it is, where the Raptors play. I'm walking down the corridor back to the press workroom, and there is LeBron in the corridor, laying on his back with a trainer stretching. They're raising his legs up and pulling on him and everything. And so being very careful to step on him or anything, I tiptoe past, and I'm just past him, and he says, "My free throw shooting any better now?" So I turned around and I said,
"Don't read nothing."
I would say it was superb in the last game, and I said, "You're not going to believe this. I have a reason for why I wasn't at the press conference. I was having computer problems." I said, "But clearly it's time to face the music now." And he got up laughing, and we laughed, and just kind of walked. He walked off smiling. I walked off smiling. That was a side of him too. That he could be a very good guy, and I think he wants to be a good guy. But his, like you said, he's also. I speak from self-knowledge. He's an only child, and he's been. Even though he certainly didn't have a pampered upbringing, he's got all the things that come with being an only child.
Right.
How special we all were.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. The world revolves around him. It's interesting when you said Labacle and you wish you'd come up with it. I'm going to tell you the one story of something I came up with that was stolen by national media. In 15 years, I came up with one witticism that got stolen. Then you're going to tell me what happened to you. You remember Kellen Winslow Jr., right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, of course. And of course, his famous college quote that followed him wherever he went.
Oh, the soldier?
Yeah.
Soldier thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so he...
And by the way, he was a guy you could take his word for nothing. But go on.
Right, and then of course the motorcycle thing, and then the total desecration of his career physically because of his own stupidity.
Right.
And so they were coming up with nicknames for players, and my nickname for him was the Soldier of Misfortune.
Well, I like it. Yeah.
And damned if the thing isn't, and I'm not saying this because of where you were from. The very next day it showed up on Cleveland.com, and the very next day it was on national sources. And it's like, holy, just give me credit for one thing. I don't get paid for this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had the one that really hurt me that I never could use, because I used it about 2 times and then they didn't play them. In the 90s, the Cavs had their overseas draft, and they took Vitaly Potapenko, I think it's
Potapenko, yeah.
Assistant coach now, yeah. And Zdrunas Ilgauskas. Well, there was a TV show at the time, and both of them were like, I guess Vitaly was about 6'11" or 7 feet, and of course Z was 7'3", and I called him Magnum PI. And Gordon Gund actually used it in a press conference and then winked at me. But they didn't play Potapenko, and then they traded him, and it just kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of my better ones. I thought it was kind of clever.
Potapenko went to Wright State, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
He's a Cavs assistant coach now, and Z was for a while, but left the franchise because, like many people, he wasn't the greatest fan in the world of Dan Gilbert.
Yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up about ownership of teams, because obviously you've seen a lot of them. I've seen a number of them. I firsthand have knowledge of Dan Gilbert. I had a friend who worked for him in a different capacity at Quicken Loans, and phones were bugged. And the interesting part of the story, in brief, goes that this individual became an avid listener of the podcast and was contributing to the podcast by coming on the air and having fun with me. And he wanted to find work, and he applied at Quicken Loans, and he said, "Hey, do you think that you could give me a reference?" And I said, "Absolutely, man. No problem, no problem." So I gave him a reference, and he got hired. And when he signed his employee agreement, it stated in writing that he could not have any contact with Moohead Radio.
Huh. Well,
in writing. I mean, and
I have a story about Gilbert too. I was on the Tony Kornheiser show, and I said we got to talking about the crazy, wild-eyed letter, the email that he sent out in 2010 when LeBron left, and I said probably alcohol. Probably I used probably twice.
Right.
Probably alcohol probably had something to do with it. No blowback. Okay, because I think anybody listening to it thought, yeah, it probably did. And I said on it also that during the casino issue, he was known for sending out crazy, I said crazed emails late at night with all that might imply, abusive emails to the plain dealer, which was editorial staff. And that's when Tony said, well, what are you saying? And that's when I said, well, probably alcohol probably had something to do with it. 18 days later, the Cleveland Scene runs a story about it. And Gilbert goes berserk and demands an apology. And basically I was told that, I was not to cover any exhibition games. Oh, no, please tell me I can go cover these meaningless things. But I also, anytime I had to write about Gilbert, I had to send it in a day early to be approved, and I had to come in and write a letter of apology. Well, the letter of apology was written for me. And they told me, oh, you don't need a guild representative, newspaper guild. And I said, well, I'm bringing one. And they said, well, you're not going to be suspended or lose any money. I said, I'm still bringing one. And the key sentence was, I went on it was first person, although I didn't write it. I went on the Kornheiser show and made comments that were speculative, unprofessional, and unfair. Well, I can live with everything but unfair, because other people have had similar stories and experiences with Dan. I said, how about inappropriate? And I was told, no, that won't satisfy Gilbert. And the Guild representative, Rachel Dissel, wanted me not to sign it. But I said, well, they're not taking any money away. They had to do something because he was threatening to cut off access to our people, our beat guys, lessen their access. And they did the least thing they could. I'm not losing any money. I'm not losing any assignments. I'll do it. And so then the home opener came up and a game that counted, so I could do it. Everybody else had their passes mailed, their season passes mailed to them. I had to go stand in the will call line to get mine.
Yeah.
But he's a petty little guy.
He's Napoleonic.
I know the fans do because he spent the money.
Yeah, he's Napoleonic. I mean,
he's a little guy. Yeah, that's exactly it. He really does have the little man's concept. I can say that because I'm 5'11", but he's a short guy. He wears lifts. Yeah,
I mean, he's.
I'm not fond of him for obvious reasons, and LeBron couldn't stand him. I mean, they were divided by culture, race, politics. The guy's a big Trump supporter. LeBron despises Trump. There was just no way. There was no way that was. He came back to atone for the way he left and to try to do something good for the city's fans. And then when he did that, it was a business decision. He left for L.A. And I had retired June 30. I had to turn in my computer on that was a Friday. On Sunday, I guess July 1, they broke into the into TV that night to announce he was going to the Lakers, and I had to write about it. And I had no computer. My wife had a 3-year-old tablet that she hadn't used in a while. And I propped it up on a lap board and started banging away, and it kept sliding all over the place because I hit the keys hard. And I said, Marilyn, get something that'll anchor this thing. And she went and she grabbed the dog's bag of dog food and put it on the lap board. I said, you really ought to take a picture of this. And she said, I would be too humiliated for this to get out. But at the end of the column, I just said, I expect him, maybe he will come back for a last hurrah at the very end of his career. But if not, have a great rest of your life, LeBron. And that's the way I felt about it. I had no bad feelings at all that he left the second time.
Yeah, I think there's a greater chance that LeBron would end up buying the Cleveland Cavaliers at some point in time than there is.
Yeah. Well, he went to L.A. because he wants to get into and he is into the movie and TV producing business.
Right.
He was very good, and he was very good in the movie he was in. I was surprised at how good he was, how natural he was. Very funny.
Just the other day on the show, I was talking about, when people move on. I mean, the one thing that, we ran a story that was a national story about Dwayne Wade saying that he was going to seek therapy when he was out of basketball to try to adjust to post-athletic life, which in one respect is probably a smart thing to do if you're of that mind, but it also tells you something about the difficulty that athletes have transitioning.
I can absolutely, yes. Clay Matthews once said, I've never had a feeling in my life like coming out of that dugout at the old stadium and the love you got when you came up those steps and you had the orange helmet on. Mark, I thought I had a freelance agreement for longer than I had, and I'm kind of coping with what do I do now myself. I'm thinking about doing a book, and I've kind of started it. But I was just there to chronicle it, to like with the Indians thing, to observe what was going on, but not to share their passion because I had to go upstairs to the press box and write about it. I can only imagine what it's like to have had such a claim your entire life and now to be without it. It's got to be a very, very difficult thing to face.
Well, one of the things that Wade said, he was quoted as saying, well, I haven't made any plans, but I know that I'm going to be as great at the next thing I do as what I did before. And I'm like, not so fast, Dwayne. I mean, you know, I've been retired a long time because government dereg on radio properties, the few got the many, right? Go figure in today's economic climate that the big guy wins and the little guy takes what he gets and goes home. You can't continue to identify. It's like I can't be Mark the radio guy for the rest of my life because that's not what I do now. So I fill my time with hobbies and doing things that are fun, and playing until my recent knee replacement, playing tennis and playing golf and doing this show. I composed music. I did a lot of things just to keep my mind active. But when a man says he doesn't have a plan, or a woman, not to be gender laced, it says they don't have a plan, but they're certain they're going to be as great at something. I can honestly tell you, I will never be as great as I was at operating radio stations. The songs that I wrote, you didn't hear on the radio. You didn't see my name in the headlines winning tennis tournaments. It's a matter of finding some kind of balance in your life. And that story really kind of, resonated.
Well, I figure he'll get a job as a color analyst and, he'll like it. That's what jocks do. We don't have any better plan.
Well, I mean, a guy
obviously does.
Guy like Richard Jefferson knew what he wanted long before.
Yeah.
And
one of the brightest players I ever talked to also.
Yeah, I mean, well-spoken, and he was cut out.
And another thing is, I retired because I couldn't take the hours of the travel anymore. Travel sucks these days. And at Ohio State, I did Ohio State football in the fall. Didn't go much of anywhere until the Cavs playoffs. Of course, that's out the window now, but in the spring. And it was every weekend, because there's no games played in Cleveland by Ohio State, was travel with Ohio State, sometimes by air, often long car drives. And in the spring, it was in and out of airports for all the way to the NBA Finals for 4 years in a row. If it's a big game at Ohio State, there's 109,000 people there. You have to get there 3 hours early, or you get there 15 minutes early because of the NASCAR-type traffic. And it was just the long hours and the travel that just beat me up. I still loved writing. And even when it was 5 a week the last 2 years for the same amount of money as it had been for 32 years. But I just couldn't take the physical toll anymore. I was 70 years old, and I wanted to work till I was 70 and max out the government benefits and leave on my own terms, and I was able to do that. But I've never found anything as personally fulfilling as writing a column.
Yeah, I mean, well, now you have the chance to write the next great.
I've done 3 books.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot of work.
And it has to be intrinsic. It has to be something that you're getting something out of. Well, this one would be seems to be pretty easy, but then you have to start hitting the keys, and it's a lot of organizational stuff. But anyway, a lot of people have a lot worse problems than I do. And my wife and I, we're I'm not going to say we're well enough off. We shouldn't have any problems unless something unforeseen happens. So I've had a good life. I had a 47.5-year career and doing stuff, that meeting people and going places and covering things I never dreamed of doing. I'd never been on an airplane till I flew up to Vanderbilt as a freshman. So yeah, what
dreams do come true sometimes.
One of the great misgivings I have, and it has a lot to do with the type of podcast I do, which interlaces humor and politics and a degree of raunchiness and a very, very opinionated kind of approach to sports. It isn't me personally. I develop a character that does something, and through the years, I've had some wonderful people on the air, but it's hard for me to get people on the air because they can't separate who I am from a professional perspective than who I am from on an entertainment basis. It would be like if you were to have interviewed, for example, somebody like George Carlin, you might have found him to be very different in a personal interview than you would find him, on stage. one of my great regrets is that a number of the journalists over time that I haven't had an opportunity to chat with, and the internet was an upstart thing when I started this. When I was in the radio business, to be honest with you, the newspaper and TV people looked down on radio people. Okay, we were not worthy because the roost was ruled by big newspapers and by network affiliated TV stations. And here we were like wildcatters, just independents on FM and AM frequencies, doing whatever the heck we did. So I never had a great relationship with newspaper people in general. And as it's gone to the podcast, it really made me feel good that you wanted to come onto the program and talk. And I hope we can do this again, because there's a lot to be gained in this. And part of my reason for doing this is not just to have fun, which is, of course, I wouldn't be doing this for 15 years if it weren't fun, but it's to get an understanding of, what I'm seeing in sports, and having another person who's from my generation who's seen a lot of the ebb and flow of attitudes and fan attitudes and management attitudes in sports. I hope that we can stay in touch. Okay,
sure.
And,
I could say that, the internet killed my business too. Everybody has a blog and everybody's an expert now.
Yeah. And I'll, at no time, the funny thing was, back when I started this, broadband had just come out. I had sold my last group of radio stations, and, we never had to worry about that phenomenon of online radio and downloading tracks,
Right.
And, I consider myself lucky. They wanted to take me out of the business. I'm lucky I got out, because the radio business changed so dramatically because of the advent of broadband capability. I never thought that this type of thing, podcasting, and I started out as an audio only show. I was one of the early video adopters. It was so funny. And today, all I have for this show, I got a laptop. I've got this camera up here, which is a Logitech portable camera. I got a microphone here that's a USB mic that plugs into the computer, and a phone that I'm talking to you through. And that's the whole show,
Yeah.
In 2004, 2005, when I first went video, I had broadcast equipment all over this desk. It was crazy. Wires going here and there because it wasn't so easily integrated. I never thought that the internet was going to become, every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And it kind of forced me to say, I'm just going to do whatever the hell I feel like doing. And if Dan Gilbert doesn't like it, Dan Gilbert doesn't like it. If I don't get interviews with management, I did have an interview with Paul Dolan, and it was a legendary one. And with Epstein, Shapiro, which bothered me because I kept calling him Shapiro, and I'm Jewish, okay? Every Shapiro I knew was a Shapiro, okay? Yeah. So, and Shapiro and I got into it on the air because he insisted on this certain non-move the runner up, non-sacrifice, do nothing but hit home runs kind of philosophy that has wound up plaguing baseball, in my opinion, and turning it into this game in which we just stand around waiting for the next guy to hit a ball out of a ballpark.
Strikeouts are home runs now.
And in 38-degree weather, it's not happening, So I discovered
briefly, I've written this. The three-point shot and the spread offense open the field and the court up in the other two sports. The analytics have strangled the field in baseball.
It's true.
It's a defensive era, and I know every base is important, but I'm not the type of person who gets a woody about moving the runner along by hitting behind him. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'd rather see 6-5 than 2-1.
Yeah, but I mean, the bottom line was when you have a pitching staff like the Indians have a pitching staff.
Well, that's what you got to do.
That's
you got to play with the hand you're dealt. Yeah, or you deal yourself. Actually,
it doesn't seem possible that guys like, and I'm not picking on Greg Allen because I think Greg Allen should be playing more actually, but a guy like that comes up to the plate, and I remember Kenny Lofton. It's like Kenny Lofton could bunt anytime he needed to bunt. Right. If it was about scoring that run that a guy like Trevor Bauer or Mike Clevenger or Corey Kluber needs, you get it done. These guys are jabbing at the ball, and they have no clue how to bunt the baseball. And
I know, yeah.
It's what were you doing in the minors all those years? It's kind of hard for me to understand.
The worst, I don't want to keep, but the worst thing I see is when a poor pitcher who hasn't, American League pitcher who hasn't batted since he was in high school has to go up there and swing the old war club at a National League park.
Yeah.
It's just a complete joke. And it's a significant advantage in the World Series to the National League, too.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, I want to thank you. There is one thing you need to do, and I want you to take this with a grain of salt, because every guest on the program has to move. Okay. But I will say this, that far more important people than I have mooed.
Mooed like a longhorn cow?
Like a cow. That is correct.
I have to move.
That is correct. Hey, now that's one of the better ones I've heard.
I'm a Texas boy, although I'm a city boy. My aunt had cattle.
My goodness, that was too damn realistic. Bill Livingston, you've been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And,
all right, Mark. Thank you.
Do keep in touch, and I'm sure something will happen that will you'll be hearing from me. Take care now. And that's it for this edition of Moohead Radio. I think I should terminate the phone call here.
Are you here?
I am here. Are you?
Okay, Archie.
Oh, he's. All right. That is that. If you're still there, Bill, take care. All right. I just think that he hasn't. Well, I just went ahead and hung up. Hey, it's fun doing these things, and it's one of the fringe benefits of the job, talking to some people who are interesting and have far more interesting stories to share. The Ernie Camacho story will go down in history. Anybody who, I thought it was easy to hit Ernie Camacho, but it turns out maybe Camacho liked hitting people. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Moohead Radio, the surprise special edition. We'll be back again on the regular program, insulting people and being generally rude and biased on Friday. Until then, hasta la vista, Pastor Heads. Good night. Good afternoon.